The story that I'm going to share with you today is about one of those really important storyteller poets that I was telling you about earlier. The tale is set back in the days of the stories, when poets could weave the world with their words, changing the way things went and even opening a path to that wonderful other world of the imagination. Now, Shannon was one of these gifted poets. She was a very young woman, hardly more than a girl, but her teachers had watched her growing abilities in amazement, perhaps even some jealousy, for her skill was very great. When she painted a scene in words, embroidering it with detail and colour, you could not only see it, but taste it, smell it, and whether it was a tale of a feast, or a forest, a beast, or a battle, when she described it, you were there. You were there. She had studied all the forms of poetry, the pleasing rusk patterns and praise poems. If she praised a queen or a warrior, their feats would last forever. And yet she was still not satisfied, for there was one poetic skill that she did not have and that no one seemed to be able to teach her. This was the immorse poetry, so inspired, so powerful, that it could open a way to change her world. In the time of the stories, people thought that there were really two worlds. There was the world of everyday action and a strange world of the imagination where anything was possible. It was a beautiful world where many wonderful and magical super treasures could be found, but it might also be a dangerous place. Creatures that were perfectly cute and harmless in that world might prove ravenous and threatening if they crossed into our everyday world. And then there was the when. Ordinary people might go there by getting lost in a fog or a forest or sailing to an island that might or might not be there. But getting back might be more of a problem. You might arrive back last Tuesday, Friday week, or 300 years in the future. Only poets knew how to get there and back, sort of safely. But it was a risk. It was a big risk. And why take that risk? Well, as I said, the stories were written about 1,000 years ago and have been told for much longer, but they do tell us that the coastlands where her people lived were no longer kind and friendly places. Cattle and crops were no longer thriving, and her people were hungry and frightened. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? It sounds like a time of climate change. Climate change. We know what that might mean, but our long ago story doesn't include details that we would recognise today. Maybe there were great storms and too much rain. Maybe it was too dry and the fertile soil was blown away. Maybe it became cold and everyone was freezing. Shannon's story doesn't tell us. It was dangerous, but the young poet didn't hesitate. She closed her eyes and began to search for the words of the song that would change her world. And it worked. This time it worked. Whether she was carried away in her mind or for real, she was swept away by the sounds of the song into a wave of shadowed wind. Shannon opened her eyes. She found herself standing, looking into a well, a sparkling pool of water, fringed by waving trees, green branches just caressing the bubbled water. She gazed into the pool, focusing her eyes just below the surface. There, look, a silver speckled fin broke the surface before a salmon curved away back into the depths. Shannon smiled and looked around her. But then she gasped. She was in the other world, or another world, This was a place of ancient tales. She knew that it had many names. The Well of Generous Women, the Well of Lovely Bubbles, a well surrounded by ancient hazel trees where the nuts containing all the wisdom of the world would drop into the water where the salmon swam. This she recognised. But in no tale that she'd been told ever was that this marvellous well was to be found at the bottom of the sea. She was standing under the sea. Her cloak was floating around her. Her long hair haloed her head. She was underwater, but she could still breathe. And she didn't even feel wet. She lifted up her arms. They felt light, almost weightless. They made her feel like singing. It made her feel like dancing. And the young poet Shannon began to dance. Her feet were like seashells and her hair was waving waterweed. She began to sing and her words bubbled out, brighter than the lovely bubbles that flowed up from the wellspring. She sang a song of joy and flowing health, a world of beauty, a world of green growing where her people could be strong. And as she sang, the bubbles rose up from the well and flowed around her, and amongst them swam the salmon. Her song became stronger, wilder, and now the waters of the well danced with her, no longer a spring, but becoming a great and unstoppable wave. The wave grew great and powerful, rising up and flowing like a tsunami, covering the land, but creating something new. Something better. It is said that the young poet joined with the water, becoming part of the river. Was she drowned or changed? Who knows? Poetry is a bit like that. What the story does tell is that the great wave made a new and flourishing land for her people, stretching all the way along the banks of this new-formed river. Even today, people still live all the way along this river, the longest river of Ireland, from the Shannon potting cavern to the estuary near Limerick. Yes, you guessed correctly. This is the story of the River Shannon, and the tale of its origin was long ago written down in the Dinchianacus, the law of place names, where we can still find it today.